Good morning. Thank you so much. Jenny, thank you and team for this invitation to be with you today. I just want to tell you, because my time is going to go so fast, so I'm going to talk really, really, really fast, but I have to tell you tonight during the if prayer, last night Rebecca asked if any of us had celebrated a Jubilee, and I wasn't really sure she was asking age, and so I didn't raise my hand, but I just want you to know that I have celebrated a Jubilee plus 12 years, so I have Jubilee knees. And so my knees last night, I could barely walk afterwards. So tonight, no matter what is going on, I will not be on my knees on the stage. It has nothing to do with my heart or my spirituality. It has to do with my Jubilee knees. And at some point, I will put on my glasses because I also have Jubilee eyes. And anybody relate to any of this? Okay, thank you. I'm not the only one. All right, so with this, we're going to dive in and we're going to go fast. There are two truths that I have really learned to appreciate, and you have some notes there that I provided for you. So in the last 2 years since our son died, in this deep grief, deep sorrow has a way of stripping away all the extraneous things, all the extra things, and leaving what really counts at the end, so that when everything has all been said and done, you get down to the things that really matter in life. And in these 2 years of stripping and grieving, I have really come to believe there are two things that are at the center of it all. And these two things that are at the center of it all is compassion for my fellow human beings and love for Jesus and his church. A few years ago, I went to Mother Teresa's Home for the Dying in Calcutta, India. And it was one of those things that I had always wanted to do. She was one of my heroes, somebody I'd really admired. And so I went and I volunteered for a day at Mother Teresa's Home for the Dying in Calcutta. And when I was there, it's a longer story, so I'll make it really short. But while I was there, they divided the women on one side and the men on the other. So there are 50 dying women on one side of this building, 50 dying men on the other side of the building. And as I approached it and walked in, I could hear screaming on the men's side of the building. And I had no idea what that was about, but I was pretty frightened walking in. I didn't know what to expect. And I later learned that there were men, that they were having maggots pulled out of their open wounds. Because the people who are dying in Mother Teresa's Home for the Dying are literally the dying. They've been picked up on the streets. There are people in the gutters. There are people who have just are destitute. And there are workers from Mother Teresa's who will go and they will find them and bring them, and so that these people are allowed to die in dignity. And so as I'm working in my volunteer day there at Mother Teresa's, I quickly became overwhelmed by the sights and the sounds and the smells of dying people. There was a reason I chose not to become a nurse, and it was because I couldn't handle some of those things that you have to do to be in the medical profession. And yet here I was with 50 women in various shades of dying, various stages of dying. And within just a few minutes, I was nauseated. I was overcome by the screaming, by the sounds, by the emaciated bodies. And I thought to myself, what in the world have I done? Why have I come here? I was a complete idiot. I thought I was doing something, good, that I could pat myself on the back, but I am in over my head. And I retreated to a corner of the room just to kind of collect myself because it was so overwhelming. And I made eye contact. I didn't mean to, but I looked up and I made eye contact with a dying woman across the room on a bed. And she motioned to me to come to her. And I was like, oh no, she didn't. No, I did not see her. Put my head down and I kind of looked up again and she was furiously motioning me to come over. I'm like, ugh. And so I made my way over to her bed, terrified, nauseated, not knowing what to say or do. And when I sat down next to her on the bed, she began to cry and she was sobbing and she's speaking Bengali, and I don't speak Bengali, but I know that in those moments she was telling me her story. She was pouring out her story. She was telling me how she became homeless and destitute and dying in Mother Teresa's. And my heart, I didn't know what to say. There was nothing I knew in English. I didn't know what to do, and all I could think of was to put my arms around her, bring her close to me, bring our faces next to each other. My tears became her tears, and I said to her, I don't know how you got here today. I don't know where your family is, and I don't know why you're here dying alone in Mother Teresa's, but I want you to know that these hands that are touching your face, these are the hands of Jesus. And he is wiping your tears because you matter to him. He loves you. And even though this life has clearly been so difficult for you, Jesus loves you. And he sent me to remind you that you are not alone and that you matter to him. And my arms around you are his arms around you. Now, when you hear a story like that, what we're left with is the only thing that I could bring to her was my presence. I had nothing to give. I had no medication. I couldn't tell her that she wasn't going to die. I couldn't tell her that her family was going to come swooping in and rescue her from that place. I had nothing to give to her but my compassion and the presence of Jesus in me as his follower, as his disciple. You have worked hard to get to where you are today. You've worked hard. I mean, you've gone to school, you've worked hard in your job, you've studied, you've read, you've learned what it means to be a woman, to be a leader. I mean, you've really worked hard. But the bottom line question at the end of the day is, what does it matter how hard you've worked? What does it matter what accolades you have? What does it matter if you've got some diplomas from sales at work? What does it matter if somebody recognizes your work and gives you a trophy or gives you a raise, or somebody in your family, or you've learned how to master Pinterest? I mean, I hate that thing. But, who cares? Who cares about any of that if you don't operate from a place of compassion for your fellow human beings? Who gives a flying fig? Nobody. It doesn't matter. Compassion for our fellow human beings is the benchmark of our lives. When it's all been said and done, the depth to which we can give and receive compassion is the measurement of the success of our lives. So that's the first thing I would say that's at the center of it all that I've learned in the last few years. The second thing that's at the center of it all is a love and a passion for Jesus and his church. And the story that I just told you about Mother Teresa's, I use that story intentionally because you might think that was amazing. So how amazing that Mother Teresa and the missionaries of charity all over the world are caring for people like that woman that you talked about, that they're reaching into and caring for the destitute, for the dying, that they're picking them up off the pavement and out of the gutter, and so that people actually have a place to die that's warm and safe and comfortable. And we can kind of say, that's amazing, and I do. I say, go, that's great. But the question I want to ask you is, where was the local church? Where is the local church? Why was it full of people like me, white Americans, who were coming to do something where they could pat themselves in some way on the back that they had gone and volunteered at Mother Teresa's? Where were the local believers? Where were the local believers in local churches who were gathering up the dying off the streets? Why did it take somebody, an NGO, somebody from another place? Where were the churches of Calcutta? Where were the believers in local churches who said, you will not die alone? You can be in my home. You can be in our church. You can be a part of us. Where are the local believers? It is not primarily, my friends, the job of NGOs. It is not primarily the job of the government to take care of the brokenness in our world. It is the job of the church. It is the job of the local church. Yes, I represented the church, the universal church, but where was the local church? Because the ministry of this world is to be done through local churches. The universal church didn't really have a lot to say with those people, but the local church are the ones who have that responsibility. In Ephesians 1, it's on your outline and on the screen, 17 to 23 from the Message, Paul says, I ask the God of our Master Jesus Christ, the God of glory, to make you intelligent and discerning in knowing him personally, your eyes focused and clear, so that you can see exactly what it is he's calling you to do, to grasp the immensity of this glorious way of life he has for Christians. Oh, the utter extravagance of his work in us who trust him. Endless energy, boundless strength. All this energy issues from Christ. God raised him from the dead and set him on a throne in deep heaven, in charge of running the universe, everything from galaxies to governments. No name and no power exempt from his rule, and not just for the time being, but forever. He is in charge of it all, has the final word on everything. Would you read this next verse with me? At the center of all this, Christ rules the church. The church, you see, keep going, is not peripheral to the world. The world is peripheral to the church. Now, let's be honest, you might not really be convinced that there is such a powerful role for the church. If we could be honest, if we could sit down and have a cup of coffee or tea together and you were able to tell me your story and I was able to tell you mine, you might say, I hear you and I hear all that talk about it, but the church, the church is kind of clunky. The church is kind of slow. The church is full of hypocrites. The church is full of people who wound. The church sometimes has tunnel vision. The church sometimes has been perpetrators of injustice and stigma. The church sometimes has failed completely to do its job. The bride of Christ sometimes seems to have a stained and torn and dirty dress. And yet, my friends, this tells us that God has put all of his eggs in the church basket. He has no other basket, if you will, to get his work done in the world. He has intended for us to do his work through the local church. That is his intention, because the church, you see, is peripheral to the world, not the world. The world is peripheral to the church, not the church peripheral to the world. And there's 1,000 reasons why you might feel that the church is really not the way to go. And I would beg you that with your heart of compassion, and you are women of compassion, it's clear you're women of compassion, you're women of commitment to Jesus, of devotion, of passionate devotion to Jesus Christ. And I would just beg you that you not walk past the local church, even though it's messy, even though it's broken, even though it's made up of people like me and you who don't get it right very often, even though the church has a lot to answer for, even though the church is not all that God intends, the church is still the device, it is the vehicle that God has intended for us to do his work. But if you're at a place where you're disillusioned with the church, you've been hurt by the church. Maybe you think that the church, you're actually pretty disenfranchised with it. Why not just start a 501c3? Why not just see a need and decide that you yourself are going to take care of it? Why should you even try to go through the local church? What would be the point? What's the difference between the church and a service organization or a 501c3? Well, I want to quickly give you 7 things that the church has that nobody else has. You don't have it on your own. No NGO has it. No government organization has it. These are unique characteristics of the church that belong only to the church. The first is the church has the largest participation. There are 2.3 billion believers scattered across this world who call Jesus, their Savior, who name the name of Jesus Christ. That's bigger than any country. That's bigger than the United Nations. That's bigger than any organization. There is not a larger entity on the face of the earth besides the Church of Jesus Christ. Well, that right there tells me it's different than anything else I might look to. It has, secondly, the widest distribution. There are churches scattered in the tiniest little pockets of rural places, from rural Appalachia to rural in another country to the largest cities. Just in the United States, there are about 350,000 congregations of faith just in the United States. I mean, it's impossible to count. There are millions. I'm not exaggerating. There are millions of churches scattered throughout this world, which means that there is a built-in distribution center for an idea, for a truth, for a program, for an approach. It exists. See, governments look for a way to distribute information, to distribute medication in other places, to distribute vaccines. They look for distribution channels. The church exists all across this planet. It exists in every little corner. There may be no other social structure in a town, but there is going to be a church. And the church has no exit strategy. The government will leave, NGOs will leave, they all have an exit strategy. They plan to stay a certain while and a certain time, but the church has no exit strategy. The church is there until Jesus comes back. It's going to keep going. That leads me to the next thing. It's got the longest continuation. The church has a track record of 2,000 years. There's no other business, there's no other NGO, there's no other organization that has a 2,000-year track record of doing good. It was the church that started the hospitals. There were no hospitals until the church formed hospitals. There weren't, if you look in almost any big city, the universities and the hospitals, 9 times out of 10, have been started by Christians, by the church. It is in our legacy to care and be compassionate. The church has the simplest administration. It's a grassroots network. Those of you in business know that nothing grows faster than something that is a grassroots movement or has a grassroots strategy. And the church has, I'm getting a little excited, I'm choking myself, has the simplest administration. It's also got the fastest expansion. The Church of Jesus Christ is growing by 60,000 converts a day. There's nothing else growing faster than the church. And so as we look at national and local and global problems, what is it that is growing fast? It is the Church of Jesus Christ. It has the highest motivation, which is love. It is the love of Christ that compels us to move out into the world. It is for love of Jesus. It is for love of Jesus that you sit here in this chair. It is for love and passion and devotion for Jesus Christ that you host what you do in your local city. It is for love of Jesus Christ that you live your life. In Him we move and breathe and have our being. There is no other organization that has love of God, love of Jesus, and that compelling love of Him that drives us out. Nobody but the church has that. And then we have the strongest authorization. In Matthew 28, Jesus said, I have been given all authority. And because I have been given all authority, I say to you, go into the world and make disciples. We have the highest authorization as the church to serve in our world, to serve in our cities, to serve in our neighborhoods. We've been authorized by God Himself to go. Nobody else has that. Nobody else has what the church has. Nobody else has a 2,000-year track record. Nobody else has distribution channels, if you will, already scattered across the world. Nobody's as big as the church. Nobody can grow as fast as the church. Nobody can be as mobile and nimble as the church. Nobody's got love. Nobody else has a no-exit strategy, and nobody else has the authorization from God Himself to go into our world and be His hands and feet. The church has it all. Ephesians 1 says that the church is not peripheral to the world. It is His body. And let me tell you something. You guys, you can't say you love Jesus and hate His body. You just can't. You cannot love Jesus with all your heart and have disdain and no use for His church, because His church is His bride. It is His body. Rick says it would be like saying to somebody, I love you, but I like you, but I don't like your wife. Well, that's a little offensive if you were to say that to a guy. I like you, but I don't like your wife. Well, it's like if we say to God, I like your son, I like Jesus, but I don't like His bride. I don't like His body. That's offensive to God. And the church is to be the hero in the world. If you really want to know, if you want to figure out whether you really are an advocate of the local church or not, ask yourself the question, who is the hero? Who is going to get the glory? If I do this, or I be a part of this activity, or if I am signing up for this, who's going to get the glory? Is it the church that's going to get the glory? Or is it going to be somebody else? Because at the end of the day, it's the bride. At a wedding, who's the star of the show? The bride. And it is the bride that is to get the glory. It is the bride that is to be the hero. And so it is in the church. The church is to be the hero of the story. So how do we apply that in the brief time that we have? How do we apply this truth that the world is peripheral to the church and not the other way around? How does valuing the local church affect the way that we look at the problems that are happening in our neighborhood, that are happening in our state, that are happening in our nation, that are happening in our world? How do we apply that local church lens to something that's going on in our world? And I want to give you a really practical, I hope, illustration that will maybe make this go from the theoretical down to the intensely practical. When I became an advocate for people living with HIV and AIDS about 12 years ago, In my first trips around the world, I landed in Mozambique, and I heard this for the very first time. I'd never heard it before, ever, in my little insulated, nice life in Southern California. But I had a conversation with a mother, a dying mother dying of HIV, and I heard her say this. She said, with tears flowing down her face, "Who will take care of my children when I die? Who will take care of my children when I die?" And I had absolutely no answer for her. This was my first trip. I knew nothing. And I've heard that question hundreds of times in the 12 years since, from mothers and fathers who were dying of a variety of reasons, or who were worried about dying and would say, "What will happen to my children when I die?" I want you in this moment to visualize a child in your life. You may not have your own children, but surely there's a child somewhere in your life that you love. And so call to your mind a child that you love and answer then that question. What would you want to happen to that child if you were the one in charge of that child? Maybe you are. What would you want? Would you want the answer to be, well, take them to an orphanage? Is that the answer that you would want for your beloved child? For your nieces, for your nephews? If I had looked at that mother and said, "Oh, it breaks my heart that you're dying and that you don't know what's going to happen to your children. I promise you, I will make sure that they get to an orphanage." Do you think that would have comforted that mother's heart very much? Or would she have wanted to hear, there's a mother and a father, there's a family that will take your child? Don't worry. Don't worry. Your baby's not going to grow up in an institution. Your baby's going to grow up in a family. If that's the answer that we would want for our children, you think of that little loved one, that little one that is in your mind right now. Would you want the answer to be for that little one? Oh, the orphanage. We will take him to the orphanage. We will take her to the orphanage. If that's not what we want for our children, why in the world do we think it's good enough for the rest of the world's children? It is not. Children are not meant to grow up in institutions. Children are meant to grow up in families. I want you to pull out quickly this little disc that you should have. An orphan disc, because I want to keep going with this just a little bit more. I have just a couple seconds left, but I want you to start with this premise. You and I were all spiritual orphans. We were orphaned. We were outside of the family of God. God pursued us, and he took us and he adopted us spiritually into his family. And what God has done for us spiritually, he expects us to do practically for the orphans in this world, to demonstrate that spiritual truth that we know what it's like to be orphaned, and we know what it's like to be adopted into a forever family. So in this little brochure, and I'm going to say some things that are kind of radical, and I'm not trying to be radical. I'm really not trying to stir anybody up or make anybody mad or hurt anybody's feelings. I'm most interested in being effective, and I'm most interested that the church be the hero and that the church be the one that gets the glory. So if you look on the back here, I want to tell you some things of how I think that this plays out with a local church lens. I'm going to put on my Jubilee glasses here to read this. Okay, so we used to think that what you should do for orphans was to pray, pay, and stay out of the way. We should give our money to some organization and let them do the work of caring for a child. We now know that we have been commissioned to go and serve the local church around the world as they care for orphans. We used to think that we should do projects for the local church. Now we know that the indigenous church should be the one that own and initiate the work. We used to be the ones that were the heroes. We were the ones that got the glory. I wanted to go hold babies when I first became an advocate. I thought that I was doing something good by going to an orphanage somewhere else and holding babies. I had no idea that I was actually causing further damage to that child who got attached to me in those seconds, and then I walked away. I didn't know. I used to make myself the hero. Now we say the local church is the hero. I used to believe in building orphanages. Now I believe in emptying orphanages. I used to believe in helping an orphan, and now we want to help without hurting. I used to believe that if I brought them things that I was helping an orphan. Now I want to give myself. I used to think that if we placed children in orphanages or group homes that I was doing something good. Now I want to serve and make sure that children are united to their own family or to an adopted family. I used to measure success by the dollars that were given. Now I measure success by how many children are placed in permanent families. I used to want to just medicate and educate orphans. Now I want to cure their problem, which is being an orphan. I used to say, let's hire a temporary family. Now I want to help equip lifelong families. I used to want to help orphans find shelter. Now I want to help orphans find a mom and a dad. I used to think that there weren't enough families, but I realize that there are more than enough families. If there are 163 million orphans in the world and there are 2.3 to 2.4 billion Christians, there are enough families. I used to want to work on the orphan crisis. Now I want to end the orphan crisis through church and family. I wanted to help orphans live a better life as orphans. Now I want to help orphans become sons and daughters. I used to want to help churches become leads to other organizations. I wanted to have our church be the lead that would donate to other organizations. Now I want to make sure that churches provide leads to adoptive families and provide the lay social workers and training and support necessary for success. I used to believe that churches couldn't do much to help with the adoption crisis globally. Now I know that churches can empower other churches to change the world. This can only happen through local churches. It won't happen any other way. I'm going to close with this. In the western province of Rwanda, I want to give you a totally practical way. Just keep taking it from the theoretical down to the most practical I can. In the western province of Rwanda, it is the Karongi district, this Kabuye. And in that area, there are 3 hospitals that serves about 400,000 people. 3 hospitals that serve about 400,000 people. There are 26 clinics. So 3 hospitals, 26 clinics, but there are 526 churches. Now you tell me who has the best possibility of doing something significant around the problems in the world, especially as it relates to healthcare and orphans. Is it those 3 hospitals where people have to walk miles and miles and miles to get to and have to get referrals? Is it those 26 clinics scattered in a few places in that district? Or is it the local church when it is empowered, when the local members are empowered? Not me coming and doing for, but me coming and training and teaching so that the local church knows how to reach. Listen, the local church knows what to do. The local church in places around the world doesn't need us to suddenly explain to them how to help in their own. They just need a hand up, not a hand out. And those 526 churches, listen, in those 526 churches in Rwanda, I really am closing, in Rwanda, 2 years ago, the government of Rwanda decided that it was wrong to have orphanages, that they didn't want their next generation growing up in institutions, that those vulnerable children. And so they set as a goal to empty the orphanages. They're the only country in Africa that has had this goal. And in the last 2 years, 1,900 children have been either reunited with their family or have been adopted by local church members so that 2/3 of the orphanages in Rwanda are now closed. They are closed because people like me and you have understood that we've been adopted spiritually and that what's happened to us spiritually is to be replicated in the physical lives of children. And what Rwanda has done is take this theory that the church is the basket that God has put his eggs in, and then they've taken it even a further level. They understand that children don't belong in institutions, that children need mothers and fathers and families, and the local church members are now the ones who are receiving training to be how to reunite, how to take an orphan that is not a part of their family, but they adopt them into their family. Listen, you guys, at the end of the day, look at that verse there on your outline, and I'll close with this. That verse there out of Ephesians. Ephesians 1 says, at the center of all this, Christ rules the church. The church, you see, is not peripheral to the world. The world is peripheral to the church. You and I are the church in our local churches. Take this lens and look at your neighborhood. Look at your community. Look at your neighborhood. There are about over 100,000 children in the United States available to be adopted. And we have 300 million people in the United States. We should not have any orphans in the United States. We have the families to do this. All it takes is us understanding that we are the local church. We are responsive to God, and that we have something to do, unlike what anybody else on the planet can do. Go be the church. I love you.